Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a concept that is widely known, but honestly really deeply misunderstood. It's the idea that everything in the universe is connected. Over the next few minutes, we're going to unpack the fascinating actual reality behind this idea. And I promise you, it's going to completely change how you view your place in the cosmos.
Everything is connected. It's a phrase that acts as the absolute bedrock of almost every single spiritual tradition throughout all of human history. But think about how people usually say it. Usually when people drop this phrase, they treat it as a hopeful wish, right? It's something they genuinely want to believe, rather than treating it as a literal, concrete physical fact.
Okay, let's dive into this. Normally, we view this whole interconnectedness concept as abstract, maybe a little esoteric, or just straight-up wishful thinking. But today, we're throwing the abstract out the window. I'm going to prove to you that everything really is connected in a very concrete, direct, and understandable way. And we're going to do that through three incredibly mind-bending scientific stories. A story of the heart, a story of the breath, and a story of the mind.
Let's start with story 1, the heart and the stars. Right now, as you're listening to this, your heart is beating. It's just a simple, rhythmic, biological fact. And the fundamental reason it's beating is that you need to move a vital molecule through your blood called hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin carries a smaller molecule called Hem B, and at the very center of Hem B is a single atom of iron. This little iron atom is exactly what allows us to bind oxygen and move it through our circulatory system. But here's the massive leap. The universe started with basically no iron at all, just hydrogen and helium. The only way iron is created in the entire universe is through supernovas, the massive explosions of supermassive stars. And to get those supernovas to form, you need massive galactic collisions that ignite new star formation. So the iron in your blood, it is quite literally forged in colliding galaxies.
But that begs the question, why do galaxies collide in the first place? They don't just randomly smash into each other for no reason. Well, to understand that, we have to look at the number 100,000. We have to zoom way, way out to observe the magnificent gravitational dance of 100,000 galaxies, all swirling together in space.
And that brings us to Laniakea. It's Hawaiian for the immeasurable heaven. It's this massive gravitational structure containing our own supercluster alongside 100,000 others. The gravitational swirling of Laniakea is what drives the cosmic collisions, which drives the massive star formation, which drives the supernovas, which forge the very iron coursing through your veins right now. Every single heartbeat you have is directly, physically connected to the swirling of the cosmos. No way around it.
Moving on to story 2, the breath of life.
I want you to imagine taking a deep, calming breath right now. Deeply grounded. Just a simple everyday action, right? Well, that simple action would have been completely impossible on Earth 3 billion years ago. Back then, Earth's atmosphere was incredibly high in carbon dioxide and had almost zero oxygen. If you took a deep breath, it would be your last. The planet was essentially uninhabitable for complex life. The only things that could survive were tiny, single-celled organisms. But luckily for us, one of those organisms was something called cyanobacteria. They had this amazing special trick called photosynthesis, allowing them to take energy from the sun and actually transform that toxic carbon dioxide into oxygen.
Starting roughly 2.5 billion years ago, these tiny cyanobacteria began what was a painstakingly slow, epic journey. First, they had to saturate the seas. Then, they had to saturate the Earth itself. It wasn't until about 900 million years ago that oxygen finally began to build up in the atmosphere. And then, 600 million years ago, we hit an absolutely crucial milestone. The ozone layer formed. Before the ozone layer, Earth couldn't sustain complex multicellular life. But once it formed, boom. It ignited the Cambrian explosion. Every complex animal, everything you're familiar with, including us, only became possible because of this excruciatingly slow journey orchestrated by tiny, invisible organisms.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that those ancient cyanobacteria never actually left us. Their direct descendants were eventually captured by plants, and today we call them chloroplasts. They're trapped inside the plant leaves you see every single day, contributing to photosynthesis. In a very real, physical way, they act as the other half of our lungs here on Earth. Every outbreath you take is perfectly mirrored by the in-breath of these ancient bacteria descendants living inside modern plants. Our breaths are deeply and fundamentally united.
It brings up a really profound thought experiment. Did a tiny ancient bacteria have a purpose? Imagine being one of those organisms 2 billion years ago. You're born, you live for a couple of weeks, you die. The world looks exactly the same when you leave as when you arrived. You might think you had absolutely zero purpose, But what you couldn't possibly understand from that perspective is that your simple, tiny breaths contributed to creating an atmosphere that made countless future lives, including yours and mine, literally possible.
And that leads us to story 3, the mind's symphony.
Now, to be clear, we aren't talking about unexplained psychic phenomena here where our brains are magically tethered together. We're going to explore the mind's physical connection through the invention and mastery of a single, beautiful instrument, the piano. If you examine the brain of a modern concert pianist using advanced imaging, you see massive, complex brain structures dedicated entirely to this instrument. Brain mapping for coordinating 10 separate fingers, working the pedals, feeling the sound, deeply understanding music theory. But here's the kicker. 5,000 years ago, that beautiful pattern of thought was completely unthinkable. It literally couldn't exist. It only became possible because humanity combined the deep history of stringed instruments with mechanical engineering to invent the piano in the year 1700. The intricate brain structures of today's musicians are built directly on top of the interconnected inventions of the past.
This leads us to a truly stunning metaphor, the palette of being. When we're born, we have access to the collective experiences, skills, and inventions of all of humanity. Think of them as colors on a palette. 5,000 years ago, playing the piano or being a computer scientist, those weren't colors on the palette. Today they are. We get to use these pre-existing colors to paint our lives. But even more amazingly, through our own creativity and unique expressions, we get to mix those experiences together and invent brand new colors, like self-driving cars or entirely new forms of art to add to the palette for all future generations.
Which brings us to the climax, the ripple effect.
So, we've looked at the heart, the breath, and the mind. You know, it's really easy to fall into a worldview where we feel like tiny specks trapped inside a massive physical container that we can't possibly affect. An outside-in container, where the universe dictates the biosphere, which contains society, and finally, down at the very bottom, there's just us, one single person receiving all the effects from the outside in. And this brilliantly illustrates how the palette of being completely flips that perspective to an inside-out ripple. It shows that the way we live our lives constantly expands the palette outward.
Let's actually trace how that ripple works in action. It starts with us. The way we live affects our friends and family, which changes how they paint their futures. That ripples out to shape the community, which then impacts society. Society alters its relationship to the biosphere shapes the physical planet, and ultimately the universe itself. Think back to our second story. If a tiny, mindless cyanobacteria, taking invisible breaths, could completely terraform the physical environment of our planet to make complex life possible, then our unique human actions, our conscious choices, and our creativity can absolutely reshape our society, our biosphere, and beyond. The absolutely crucial point here is that we are not just in the universe, we are actively building it.
Which leaves us with a final vital question. Unlike those ancient bacteria, we have the amazing gift of consciousness. We can look at the science, the iron from stars in our blood, the ancient breaths in our lungs, the centuries of human innovation wiring our brains, and we can deeply understand our connectedness as a literal physical fact. So the challenge for you is this. Now that you know this isn't just an abstract wish, but the concrete truth of how the universe operates at every single level, how are you going to use it? How will you use this knowledge to shape your own life, expand the palette of being, and change the world around you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really